Hey guys, Jack on Wrist here, back in another video. In today's video, I want to talk about a very decisive topic within the watch community, which is whether you should buy a vintage or a modern Rolex. So this is certainly a very interesting topic because I feel like there are no wrong answers, but there's certainly a lot of people out there who have strong opinions on this matter. And really, before I get started, I want to ask that if you have an opinion on this, please leave your comment in the comment section down below. I'd love to discuss this with you. I try to respond and interact with every single comment I get. I find this topic very timely as well because I recently purchased myself a Rolex Explorer reference 124270, which is the newest reference of the 36mm Explorer. And I talked about that in my last video, which I encourage you to check out. And the comments in that video were extremely decisive on both sides. Some people were saying that I can't believe you sold your old watches, and especially your older Rolex, because it had so much character, it doesn't compare to the new ones. And then on the other side, a lot of people were saying, oh, the new ones are built way better, and you made a great move. And so I just thought it was a great opportunity to really break it down and talk about the pros and cons of each side. I've been very fortunate to own a few different Rolex watches in my short collecting career, as far back as my 1966 Rolex Turn-o-Graph Datejust, which was my first Rolex, and as recent as my new 2024 Rolex Explorer. And so I feel like I have a decent amount of perspective on this topic, but of course, if I miss something, please let me know in the comment section down below, and of course, any other thoughts you might have on this particular topic. So first and foremost, I think that the greatest reason to buy a vintage Rolex watch is because of the pure variety that exists. I mean, let's be realistic. If you're only looking at a modern Rolex watch, you're pretty much limited to the past 10, maybe 15 years of the Rolex catalog. But if you open yourself up a little bit and you're willing to try a vintage watch, you've obviously unlocked decades and decades of different models. As I mentioned, my first ever Rolex was a 1966 reference 1625 Turn-o-Graph Datejust model, and that's a type of watch that you're really not going to see today. It's super unique, it has a lot of character. A lot of people talk about vintage watches having a certain character or romance to them, and I kind of agree. That particular watch especially had a lot of really cool character to it, so I certainly see that perspective, and I can see why you'd want to look at those vintage models because they have a lot of stories to tell personally in terms of what they may have been through and experienced, and beyond that, again, you have a lot of different choices out there. Again, if you're limiting yourself to the current catalog only, you really only have so many watches to choose from. And so I really think it's fun to kind of look back and see, okay, I want an Explorer, well, what reference do I want? Or I want a Submariner, I have all these different options. But if you're looking at just the modern pieces, you have basically one choice. I certainly understand that any Rolex watch, whether vintage or modern, is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but you certainly are going to get a better deal on the vintage side. Of course, I'm excluding the ultra rare different variations of vintage Rolex watches, really looking at some of the more common models, like your sports models, maybe like your Datejust. Those are the type of watches I'm really referring to here. Obviously, a vintage Paul Newman Daytona is not going to be really any cheaper than a modern Daytona. It's probably way more, but again, we're just sort of excluding that for this conversation. And when you look online, you can see a significant difference in the prices. I mean, take a look at something like a Rolex Datejust. If you want to buy a modern one, you're probably looking at $7,000, $8,000, but on the vintage market, you can get a really nice example from, let's say, the 70s, 80s for maybe about $3,000 or $4,000, depending on where you look. If you're someone who really just wants to own a Rolex and is not really concerned about all of the modern features, but just wants that iconic status and all of the history that comes with a Rolex watch, such as a Datejust in this particular example, you're going to be saving yourself thousands of dollars to make that choice for vintage. Of course, I want to make it clear, I'm not saying anyone should buy a Rolex just for the pure status, but again, I'm just saying, if you're someone who wants a Rolex, vintage is a good way to go, as I'm sure many of you already know. So what are the disadvantages of vintage Rolex watches? Well, I think they're pretty obvious. I think really the main thing you miss out on with a vintage piece is a lot of the modern features that are really comforting to have on a day-to-day basis. A lot of these older Rolex models have rock solid movements that are pretty easy to service, but on the other side of the coin, they're missing a lot of really key features like anti-magnetism, shock resistance, a long power reserve, etc. And that's just talking about the movement. You move along to something like the bracelet, and again, you're missing out on some really modern features like solid end links, solid mid links, a really solid milled clasp, and on-the-fly adjustments. I mean, there are Rolex watches that are from pretty recent times, about the mid to early 2000s, with hollow end links, hollow mid links, fold-over clasps. I mean, that stuff is not really exciting for a modern watch buyer. And again, to Rolex's credit, these watches do hold up over time, and a lot of people will say these bracelets are very comfortable, but I just would really hate to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a watch and not get a lot of those modern features that come on really all the other major brands' watches these days. That train of logic was the exact reasoning why I wanted to upgrade from my older reference 114270, the old 36mm Explorer, to the newer one, the 124270. I wanted the solid mid links, I wanted the solid clasp, the on-the-fly adjustment, the 32 series of movements with anti-magnetism, shock resistance, a longer power reserve. Those are all things I wanted to wear in my day-to-day watch, and you don't get those with a vintage piece. I would argue, in my experience owning a vintage Rolex, I was hesitant to wear it every single day because I just wasn't really sure how it would hold up. So that bridges perfectly into my next thought as to why you'd want to buy a modern/new Rolex. I think that really the thing you're getting in these watches is a solidity, a feeling that is maybe over-engineered, overbuilt to some, but a feeling that you can't replace with a vintage watch. Again, there might be a romance or a comfortability in some of these older pieces, but again, there's a reliability piece that I think you sort of miss out on when you compare them to the newer pieces. I can tell you in my short time with my new Rolex Explorer, I feel way more confident in its longevity and the ability that I can pass this down to my kids in 50, 60, 70 years, than my older model. I think there's a huge difference there. And that watch itself was also very solid, no shade to that, but you can just feel, a heftiness that you just didn't have with some of the older pieces. Now that does come with a disadvantage, and that really is scarcity, and so it's hard to really find these watches at retail. Everyone knows that whole story. And also price. I mean, these pieces are obviously expensive, way more expensive than some of the older models. I mean, to go from my 114270 Explorer to the new one, I had to pay a couple $1,000s more. It wasn't a cheap upgrade. Honestly, I don't have a lot more to say about the modern pieces. I think they sort of speak for themselves. Everyone really knows what the current Rolex catalog looks like, and I think they all know why you'd want a sort of modern watch. That being said, I'm curious, do any of you guys wear a vintage Rolex every single day? And how do you feel about it? Do you feel like it can handle the elements and you're confident in its ability to survive and really feel, solid on your wrist? Or, do you kind of feel a little bit of nervousness knowing that your watch is maybe, 20 plus, 25 plus years old? As for myself, when I had my older Rolex Datejust Turn-o-Graph model, I was very hesitant to wear it every single day. I was a little nervous about it, but that's just really my personality. I really like a watch that's overbuilt, over-engineered, as I referred to before with some of these modern pieces, and so I really enjoy my newest Explorer. That kind of gives me that feeling versus the vintage piece, but I don't know, everyone has their own opinion on it and everyone feels comfortable with something different, so I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, I really would appreciate it if you could like this video and subscribe to the channel for new watch content. Also, leave your comments in the comment section down below. I love responding to every comment. It's really fun for me to interact with you guys and really just be a part of this watch community. That's pretty much it. Thank you for watching again, and I'll see you in the next one.